Hi guys, I don't know if this camera is straight. Heh, neither am I. So anyways, if you don't know, my name is Carrie. This is my channel Gender Mix, where I actually talk mostly about being a non-binary, trans-identified adult, and things that are relevant to people, specifically like non-binary adults, kind of give some visibility that it's not just like a teenage phase kind of thing. Like there are adults living life who are non-binary or genderqueer, or not on like a binary spectrum kind of thing. So today I actually want to talk to you guys about labels, because I've been giving some thought to like the way my use of labels for myself has really evolved in really just like the past year or so, which is kind of, in the scheme of things, a short period of time. So labels can be really important to us as people for a couple of reasons. First, they help us understand ourselves. So if you think about like the most obvious example is teenagers, because most of us either are a teenager or have been a teenager that are watching this video. And we all kind of go through some experiences where we're like experimenting with our style or our haircut, or sometimes even our friend groups. The music we listen to is like super important to us at that age. And even like as adults, we'll always have this like connection to that music we listened to when we were like 16 and 17, because it had this impact and it spoke for us and about who we were as people oftentimes. Everyone can kind of relate to that. So the use of labels is about understanding ourselves, but it's also a shorthand to say like, oh, this is something you should understand about me, and this like 1 or 2 word descriptor will give you that information and that basis. So when I was, like I always talk about like how I experienced my gender didn't actually change over time. Like when I think about when I was a kid and when I was a teenager and like growing up and how I felt about myself, like that didn't really change. What had changed for me as an adult was I all of a sudden got very uncomfortable with how people interacted with me and like saw me as a woman or as female, when I was like, wait, but I'm not. And I don't know like what flipped that switch. For some people, like they see a video or they read something and they're like, hey, I didn't know other people felt like that. But like I've been reading about gender for a decade at least, probably more. I've seen videos, I'd come across this stuff, and it wasn't like that kind of thing that clicked it for me. Like there was something in my lived experience. Maybe my body just like changed its hormone makeup a little bit and it became more important. I don't know, but it happened. So I came to this place where I was like, well, this can't be going on any longer. So how do I identify? I was like, I don't think I'm a trans guy, but I don't know, like. So I explored that. I explored like all kinds of non-binary gender identities. I came across the label that I still use, polygender, that you have no idea what I'm talking about, and that's okay. Almost no one does, including like other non-binary people, or even if they've heard of the term and like understand it's a multi-gender identity, it still requires some explanation. So it didn't really serve my purposes of being a shorthand to describe myself to other people. For myself, I'm like, my presentation is clearly a bit more masculine. The way I experience my gender itself is probably closest aligned to being like a guy, but there's a little bit of like a woman in there, and like it overlaps and exists together, but sometimes it's a bit fluid and sometimes it's not, and sometimes it feels like this separate thing that's like maybe on a binary color wheel spectrum, but not necessarily linear. But I kind of didn't use non-binary for a long time for myself. Like I was okay with other people referred to me that way, but I was like, oh, but like I'm kind of mostly binary. But so I liked genderqueer, and I still really like genderqueer. Like the word queer is like an example of really powerful label, because there are people who love it, who embrace it as like a reclamation, as reclaiming a slur against them. Then there are people on the opposite end who are like, that is a slur, it's hurtful, it like was hurtful to me in my past, don't use that word for me. Then there's other people who are like, call me queer, call me gay, call me LGBT, like they don't care. So only use like words like that for people who have expressed to you that that's an okay term for themselves. But again, like labels are important to people, but then in some instances they're not, right? So I was like, all right, like polygender or genderqueer or non-binary, and I still say that like on lots of my videos, I'll just like ramble off words, and that's really how it's become for me. Like my gender is just kind of like, it's whatever. I just like, it's a lot of things, and like I can't explain it to you in a short 1 or 2 words anymore. But it's become more about how other people perceive my gender and what it tells them, like how it tells them to interact with me. So non-binary is becoming, I don't want to say super well known, but a lot more well known. And so I've really kind of started using that a lot. I've actually filled out a couple, like I donated to something and I signed like a petition thing. that like in the past month that both of them asked for your gender, but they just had to like fill in the blank. And I actually used like non-binary trans. And I was like, all right, I feel like this is explaining who I am. And remember, not all non-binary people identify with the word trans. I didn't know at first if I would identify as trans. Like I took some unpacking to decide if I did. I have a friend who like the first time I had met him, like we were in a group of people and I was pre-op on my chest, and like he like was sharing some of his experience and like advice and whatever. And at the end of the night, he was like, oh, by the way, like, what are your pronouns? And I was like, oh, like, sorry, I forget that, like, people don't assume that anyone has they, them pronouns. And he's like, oh, so, like, are you transmasculine? And I was like, yeah, sure. And the funny thing about that word is, like, I'm okay with that being an adjective for myself, but not, like, an identity for myself. And I don't know why. Like, I'm on hormones. I have had surgery. Like, I identify as trans. You can refer to me as being transmasculine, but like, I don't know. But it was the kind of thing where like, I wouldn't claim that label for myself, but for him, he, like, that was how he interpreted it, and that was enough. And so for some people, like, I will just kind of start to throw out words like trans, non-binary, androgynous, transmasculine, and like, when the light comes on, I'm like, yep, that's it. Like how you need to understand it to understand me, because it is complicated, and it can change, and people interpret things differently. So I feel like this became more about me than than it should have. Like it wasn't really about me. Like I was using my experience as the example for how your identity and your labels can shift, because you will have moments and words that you're really tied to and you really like, and they really express who you are, like polygender. And then you'll realize that that means nothing to almost 100% of the rest of the world, and you have to kind of accommodate to that, but it's okay. Like it's okay if you have to choose a different word to describe who you are, if it's going to help that person react to you the correct way. And so I probably, for a while at least, will just hang on to like, also like genderqueer. I really, like I said, I really like that word, but also like the non-binary trans label. And I probably will use both of those, like I like using it together. I feel like that kind of expresses like, I think that's my way of addressing the fact that like I'm not just being like, oh, I don't fall into society's norms, because I don't, but also like those like norms are total BS, but it's about more than that. It's still about how I'm experiencing my gender and how other people are supposed to interact with me. So yeah, that's my thoughts on labels. And like there are new labels all the time. Like for example, what is it? I always forget the word, Achillean and Sapphic. It's like you're attracted to like masculinity or femininity, not in a like a cisgender way. So like I would say like Achillean would apply to me, like I'm attracted to men, but it doesn't have to be like a cisgender man. Like, but I'm not attracted to say like a woman who's just like a butch presenting woman. And I use that like as somebody who uses that as their own label. I flip and hate that. Like there are a lot of labels you can use for me. That is not one. And I hate it. And I hate it because one, it applies to women. I'm not a woman. And two, it applies to women who are attracted to women typically. And I am not. And like, there's nothing wrong with that. Like I have friends who fall into that label and they're great people. But like that's like that label is like the actual opposite of me. So if you're seeing me that way, like that makes me uncomfortable. Right? So like, I guess that's a really good example of how you don't want to label other people without their like assent to it, and like not make assumptions about people's gender, sexuality, and all that. Anyways, once again, this video is too long and I probably don't know how much of a point I really made. But really like back to like I said at the beginning, if your labels change, if how you like need people to respond to you, like if you choose a label that's not perfect for you, but it's perfect for how other people understand you, then that's fine. Like that's achieving your goal, and you can still have like your individual label that how you understand yourself, and a label you use outwardly, and that's how other people understand you, and life is great. And that's it. That's all I'm gonna say about this for now. But yeah, if you have like a unique label that you like to use, or like a reason you really like or don't like certain labels, feel free to leave me a comment. You know, do like the subscription thingy, all that stuff. Have a great weekend, and I'll talk to you next week.